Hey, folks. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. And I've got some good news. Remember that Sunset Lake CBD.com sale that I had talked about? The one with the coupon code BF, which was going to get you 30% off of everything on their website. And not just 30% off of everything on their website. Orders over $125. Get to choose one free 20-count jar of gummies. Gummies? That means the sleep gummies with melatonin and CBD, or the vibe ones with 1 milligram THC and CBD, or just the straight CBD gummies. $125, you get to choose a free 20-count jar, and orders over $250 receive a free Sunset Lake CBD beanie. And on top of all that, 5% of proceeds from the coupon code BF go to Planned Parenthood, 501c3, that provides reproductive health care services, sex education, and information to millions of people worldwide. And on top of that, we at the Majority Report are going to match that 5%. Remember how we all thought that sale was going to end yesterday? Well, I got good news for you. It still exists today.
Whoa.
You've got 12 more hours. Really, actually, just 3 minutes less than 12 hours. SunsetLakeCBD.com, their Black Friday sale. BF is the code. You get 30% off of all of their CBD products that are grown with integrated pest management, no pesticides, third-party tested. It's a great company in terms of their business practices. Huge movement partners. They've donated tens of thousands of dollars to strike relief funds and refugee resettlement and carceral reform and food pantries and mutual aid. And now they're doing it for Planned Parenthood. 5% of proceeds we will match at the Majority Report. So check it out. SunsetLakeCBD.com. Coupon code BF for another 12 hours to get all of their great CBD products. All right, now time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, November 27th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, author, writer, professor of climate justice at the University of British Columbia, author of her most recent Doppelganger, a trip into the mirror world, Naomi Klein, will be here today. Also on the program, fourth Israel-Hamas hostage prisoner exchange imminent today. Both sides open to extending a ceasefire as Gaza gets an influx of aid, and just breaking, it appears that the ceasefire will be extended for 2 more days. Don't have all the terms associated with that, but we will update you over the course of the show. Meanwhile, Burlington, Vermont police arrest a suspect in the shooting of 3 Palestinian college students. Suspect just pled not guilty. More on that later. Congress returns from recess to deal with Defense Department defense budget authorization, FAA authorization, Ukraine and Israel aid packages, and more. The Portland teacher strike ends. They split the difference on salaries. No word on school size or classroom size. We'll get to that in a bit. Seattle area Macy's workers go on strike. Amazon hit by strikes in Europe. Biden to skip COP28 in Dubai. Court docs show Facebook and Meta designed to target and hook kids. Meanwhile,
No.
Twitter, yeah, I know, surprising. Meanwhile, Twitter losing millions of dollars in advertising sales because Elon Musk. All this and more on today's Majority Report.
Trying to get us sued?
What's that?
Saying Elon Musk's fault that Twitter's advertising is down.
I never said that.
Okay.
I just said,
Because ... Elon Musk.
yeah, it's called a cliffhanger.
I guess we don't want to be media matters to.
Yeah. Slap suit. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us after your Thanksgiving holidays. And of course, here for Monday Fun Day, Emma Vigland.
Hello.
Straight from her Thanksgiving weekend.
Yes. You know, in theory, we have these days off, but they are not relaxing. They are not relaxing, all that family time.
Family time. There was a lot of, I don't know if you had a lot of arguing about Israel and Gaza. I had a decent amount. And then just layered on top of the normal family stuff. Yeah, it was a little trying.
I will say that I called, I think on our last live show together, that the Patriots-Giants game that you would attend would end in a 10-7 score. And that's exactly what happened.
That's exactly what happened.
Someone find that it was like on the last show, and that's your introduction to football for Saul. Unfortunately for him.
I think Saul's probably going to make a quick exit as a football fan. He probably watched one of the worst games ever, and It was a little bit rainy and cold in the last quarter and a half. But as we're walking out, I mean, he was psyched. He had never seen a stadium full of 80,000 people before. That's sort of impressive.
It's a crazy, thing to witness.
And thank God for the jumbotrons, which we watched more than the actual field, it seemed like. But we did walk out of there, and he was like, no, I had a great time, but I think I'm probably more of a basketball guy.
Yeah, well.
Yeah,
right.
that's right.
And good timing for that in terms of the Celtics. And the Patriots are entering in, it really starting to feel like we're just about to enter into like a Victor Kayam era of Patriot football. And
it's going to be bad. But in terms of the football versus basketball thing, it seems like I've lost my proxy battle with Matt. So, Saul, you
The future.
Yeah.
You've won him over.
I mean, I would prefer a basketball fan to a football fan, to be honest with you. Just
That's
in terms
probably
of, like,
right.
you don't have
That's
to deal with
probably
the
right.
concussions and all
Yeah,
that
no,
stuff.
and just the politics behind basketball are better. I don't know how I ended up like this, but here we are.
All right. With all that said, a lot of news to talk about today. Obviously, we're on day 4 now of the prisoner hostages exchange between Hamas and Israel. Also, day 4 of a ceasefire. There's been about 160 UN trucks, this is according to the Red Crescent, that have reached northern Gaza in terms of aid. It appears as if the ceasefire is going to be extended for a couple of days. Unclear under what terms. I know earlier Israel was floating the idea of 10 hostages released per day of ceasefire. So it becomes, if you think about it, really hard. Not even that hard. It becomes really bizarre in some way, because while Hamas is holding hostages and unclear, the totality of the prisoners who are being released by Israel, Israel will detain people. So it's not necessarily anybody who's been convicted of anything by Israel. Israel has also reportedly threatened these released prisoners from talking to the press, et cetera, et cetera. Remember, these people get released and they're still under control, essentially, of Israel because they're going to return to occupied territories. We don't know much about them.
Although the list that was initially given of like 300 or so, and then 150 they whittled it down to, many of those were teenagers arrested for small things like throwing rocks at tanks.
Right. And like I say, we know broad strokes. We don't have the sort of the individuated stories that we hear about the Israelis. But at the same time, the idea that like the ceasefire, if you really start to look at it, well, if you start to look at it, the pause, but the idea that they are going to extend it for, Hamas to do something. If you look at this from afar, it looks like that in many respects, the Israelis are holding the entire population, civilian population of Gaza hostage. And the idea is nice country you have there, but if you don't want those people bombed more, release our hostages. I mean, it is it really is in many respects a hall of mirrors. But all that said, here is a clip of Chris Murphy, and this is where we're headed. Joe Biden is anachronistic in a lot of things, and perhaps maybe most anachronistic when it comes to his Israel policy. There is, I don't think we're going to see another Democratic president again who is going to show this much deference to the Israeli government. And I would just say this: we know this deal has been on the table for weeks and weeks. I have no doubt that Joe Biden was heavily involved in the diplomacy for this. But it also is quite clear that this is not something that started 6 weeks ago. And we also know that in no time has the U.S. government, at least there's been no reporting to the effect that we're going to condition our aid upon you doing this. And the Biden administration seems to think that, like, well, had we not been as compliant with Israel's wishes, then we wouldn't have this leverage. But that idea, I think Chris Murphy is starting to indicate that, like, we don't necessarily buy that. There's laws of physics and power that exist. Here's Chris Murphy talking about the idea of like conditioning aid.
We regularly condition our aid to allies based upon compliance with U.S. law and international law. And so I think it's very consistent with the ways in which we have dispensed aid, especially during wartime, to allies, for us to talk about making sure that the aid we give Ukraine or the aid we give Israel is used in accordance with human rights laws. And that'll be a conversation we will all be engaged in when we get back to Washington on Monday.
Well, President Biden said that he thinks it's an okay idea, but he also worries it could hinder diplomatic efforts to condition the aid, because you are going to have to deal with this. This is something that is going to be on your plate to vote on quite soon.
Yeah, obviously this will be a conversation we have when we return. I guess I'm not sure what would be controversial about simply saying that aid we give any country has to be used in compliance with international law. And, yes, of course, I do think that Israel needs to be more careful in the way that it is conducting these operations. I think that you can defeat Hamas without this level of civilian casualty. And so that's an appropriate discussion for us to have, in part because I really don't know that it serves Israel's strategitic aims in the long run if Hamas ultimately is given this kind of bulletin board recruiting material.
Yeah, it seems a little late for the bulletin board recruiting material, but basically what's going on here is Joe Biden, like I say, anachronistic policy towards Israel, thinks that, you can go back to read Peter Beinart's piece back in 2020 before he was elected president in terms of Biden's sort of past deference to Israel and its administration.
And his many donations that he received from pro-Israel, one of the top recipients in the Senate and as a presidential candidate from pro-Israel groups.
I mean, regardless of what ultimately motivates it, but yes.
Sure, what comes first, chicken or the egg?
Exactly. But nevertheless, what Murphy's doing here is basically setting the groundwork for if there's going to be Israeli aid, it's going to be conditioned. And that allows Biden to go back and say, look, well, my Congress won't do it without conditioning. And of course, then, Netanyahu gets on the phone to AIPAC and says, metaphorically, of course, I'm sure they have no contact because AIPAC's not registered. These are the people that we need to go after and threaten with, dropping $10 million in outside expenditures. But nevertheless, this is where things are headed. Biden can pay lip service to, that's good, but this would hurt negotiations. In many respects, it probably wouldn't.
Yeah, that's a question. Is like when she says it would hinder diplomacy, it's like, I think maybe if we took a more even hand approach to the Israel-Palestine, it would actually help diplomacy.
It's
what would it hurt is like local lobbying, like you say in our.
Well, the argument that Biden would have you believe is that if we're not super nice to the Israelis, they're not going to do what we ask them to do if we ask them nicely.
Aren't we being super nice?
As opposed to the idea of like, hey, it's going to be hard for me to get authorization for X, Y, and Z, Iron Dome, whatever it is, unless you guys start acting like within international, rules.
Yeah, not rogue.
And here's the other point. Murphy says, it's not controversial, and he's saying that because he wants to be able to promote these type of conditions. But it is highly controversial because we know. I mean, it's simply unequivocal. You can say that I don't believe in the UN or I don't believe in international law, or it's just because of X, Y, or Z that they've passed this. But the occupation is illegal. The 700,000 settlers who didn't just sort of pop up there through some type of teleportation, that's illegal. There is a strong argument, aside from moral considerations, because obviously from a moral standpoint, I think most people can agree that the killing of civilians is morally reprehensible. But if you want to look at international law and what people living under occupation can do under the terms of international warfare, it's pretty broad. But the point being that it would be controversial to condition these things on international law, but I think it still may happen. We'll see. I hope if any of it gets passed, because it's going to set a standard in which future administrations hopefully will be able to assess Israeli behavior without having to sort of make it a political issue. It's nice to be able to defer to some type of rules-based system. In a moment, we're going to talk with Naomi Klein, professor of climate justice, University of British Columbia, and author of Doppelganger, Trip into the Mirror World. First, couple of words from our sponsors. Folks know that I struggle with sleep. It hasn't been any easier, frankly, the past month or two. Lack of sleep cause weight gain and mental distress, lower productivity, if that's your thing. Sleeping less than 6 to 7 hours a night linked to reduced white blood cell count. That means like your immune system, et cetera, et cetera. Sleep super important. I've got multiple different sleep regimes. The weather started turning a little bit cooler. I turned to Beam Dream. It is a powder that essentially is like a healthy hot cocoa for sleep. Right now, my listeners are going to get a special discount on Beam Dream's powder. It's their best-selling hot cocoa for sleep. No added sugar. It's available in seasonal flavors that are delicious. Cinnamon cacao. Did I say that right? Sea salt caramel.
Cocoa?
No, it's like cacao.
Oh.
I think it is cacao. It's like that really.
I know what you're
super,
talking about, but I've never said it out loud. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sea salt, caramel, and white chocolate peppermint. I grew up as a kid. My mom gave me hot milk to sleep. This is like this, but better, because Dream contains a blend of reishi, magnesium, which I know is huge in terms of the uptake, L-theanine, and melatonin, which I went to a sleep clinic at one point. They said melatonin's. They help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. Recent clinical study revealed Dream helped 93% of users wake up feeling more refreshed. 93% reported that Dream helped them get a more restful night's sleep. You just mix Beam Dream in hot water or milk. You stir or you froth it, and you enjoy before bedtime. It's great. It's great this time of year, too. When the temperature gets a little colder, really nice. I mix it in, I try different things. I've got now a regular regimen, depending on the night. Sometimes I break it to get something, some hot cocoa.
Very
That
nice.
is actually like going to make me sleep. You can find out why Forbes and New York Times are all talking about Beam and why it's trusted by the world's top athletes. If you want Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, take advantage of the biggest sale of the year, 50% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/majority. Discount auto applied at the checkout. No code necessary. That's BEAM, shopbeam.com/majority for up to 50% off. Also, today's show sponsored by great company out of Canada. Our guest is from Canada too today. Henson Shaving. Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer. Made parts for, I guess it was like the Mars rover and the International Space Station, I think. One of those jobbies, or two of them, frankly. And now they are making precision shaving shavers. Disposable razors, no good. I used to advertise for a subscription-based thing. You get hooked into that, and all of a sudden you grow a beard, and what are you doing? And so Henson Shaving came to us. I tried this out. Amazing. Turns out the problem with shavers is not the handle or the cartridge. It's not the quality of the blade. Anybody can sharpen steel. It turns out it is the distance from the blade from the shaver. And because these guys use that computer numerical control machine, they make metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches, less than the thickness of a human hair. It's a great shaver. That means secure and stable blade. It gets better. This razor has built-in channels. And here's the thing. You buy this and you have it for the rest of your life. There's nothing that's obsolete. There's no subscriptions. This is not a business model. This is a great shaver. I think only Canadians could come up with something like that now.
Such a great deal.
And the thing is that after you buy this, it costs $2 to $3 or maybe $3 to $5 a year on buying those non-proprietary blades. And right now, if you pick up a Henson shaver, put into the basket a 2-year supply of blades for free, 100 blades, put it into your cart, enter the code majority, you will get the blades for free. HensonShaving.com/majority. This is honestly a great gift. They've got a bunch of different models.
Oh, yeah.
Check them out. HensonShaving.com/majority. All right, quick break. When we come back, all those links, incidentally, in the podcast and YouTube description. We come back, we're going to be talking to Naomi Klein, professor of climate justice, University of British Columbia, author of her latest, Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. Real pleasure to welcome back to the program Naomi Klein, professor of climate justice at the University of British Columbia, author of multiple best-selling, New York Times best-selling books, and her most recent Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World. Naomi, it's great to see you. Matt just told me that he accidentally put Naomi Wolf into the... But this has been going on.
I was thinking about the thing.
We were going to go really into the mirror world. We're going to dive right into the mirror world.
You would not be the first people to do that, by the way. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is this book is a little bit of a departure for you, I think, relative to the other ones that you and I have talked about over the years. And you're using this concept of doppelganger as a metaphor of sorts. I think 20 years ago when I started to interview you back for, I think it was like No Label, maybe at
No
that
Logo.
time. No Logo, sorry.
Sam, you're just screwing up right, left, and center.
I know. But
No
that's what
Labels
it was.
is a
Naomi
terrible
Wolf had a No
political
Label book. No, but I'm quite convinced I must have interviewed her once or twice.
Sure, yeah.
Earlier at that time. And it's been sort of a fascinating 20 years, but also sort of exhausting. But let's start with this. It starts for you, it starts in seeing up in Vancouver, sort of these protests, these medical freedom protests. But talk about like just the sort of the genesis of and what's happening with this metaphor.
Yeah. So first of all, it's great to see you. Great to see you, Emma.
Great to see you.
It's a different kind of book in sort of tone and style. It's kind of more playful and experimental in the sense that it uses the doppelganger as a tool to look at all different kinds of ways that we double ourselves, right? So I happen to have a doppelganger. There are lots of people who do. I get perennially confused with Naomi Wolf, but the book is not about that. It's about the way that we create doubles of ourselves online. It's the way AI creates doubles of us. It's the way that we partition our political world into this kind of very reactive doubling where the right has a sort of replica copycat version of every social media platform, fundraising tool. They're even making their own money, on the Steve Bannon show. And also copycat arguments, like doublings of arguments. But we also, on the left side of the spectrum, are very reactive with them. So it's about all of that. My books have always tried to make maps of our political moment. I did that with the shock doctrine and with This Changes Everything. With this book, it's also a map of the kind of COVID moment and how we have changed, how our political culture is changing. And it's a weirder map because we are in weirder times. So it's trying to kind of wrap its arms around the prevalence of conspiracy culture and the way lots of people are kind of becoming doppelgangers of who they used to be, right? We all know people who have changed, and we're trying to understand, is this still the same person? How did this change happen? What are the financial incentives for this change? Are we the ones who've changed? We're all accusing each other of having been, become victims of like invasion of the body snatchers. So what is happening? And so Doppelganger tries to answer some of that.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it just COVID is such and you write about this obviously, but it's such an important moment to analyze that very dynamic because it was an accelerant in many ways. And you see the mirroring of certain arguments when it comes to COVID, right? Where the critique of big pharma on the liberal left side is the same kind of prism by which these anti-vaxxers choose to come at this argument, but it's quite, anti-humanist and also skeptical of expertise and aligned with the right at this point. What was that dynamic like writing about that?
Yeah, well, I think, Sam mentioned seeing these protests in the community where I live. I started the pandemic in the US. I had been teaching at Rutgers and, we were just kind of outside New York. And there was a little bit of this starting to happen, particularly outside of gyms. And it was mainly like the extremely religious and the extremely fit. who were the first people to decide to not believe that COVID was real, right? So they were going, streaming into mega churches. With the community where I lived had a very large Orthodox Jewish community that was breaking various lockdown rules. And then there were the gym owners who were like, no, we demand the right to lift weights, even if this, and so, part of what I'm trying to understand is like, what is the common thread between these two? Like, why is there this kind of coming together of the wellness crowd and the sort of greenish left, right? And the far right. And because after I moved from the States to Canada to be near my parents who are in their 80s and not well. And this stuff is a lot stronger outside of big cities. And so I've talked to a lot of people who are in rural communities who've seen a lot of this, where it's not so much the far left as I call it the far right. Like, there are people who are interested in alternative health. Maybe they're interested in GMO foods, but mainly from a wellness perspective. And then you started hearing that people who are vaccinated are actually GMO people. Like the vaccine has. So it mixes and matches parts of the discourse that I recognize as somebody who's been part of the left for 30 years, and this we don't love big pharma, we don't like big tech, we don't like big agra, and it takes that and it warps it and it turns it into something that actually is not taking on these large businesses, that isn't taking on the trade rules that have allowed them to have such an outsized impact as the movements that I've been a part of have done, and it kind of pivots it. And suddenly it's about immigrants, and suddenly it's about the schools are turning your kids trans. And so I'm trying to understand, like, how do you do that pivot? How do you take the yoga instructor who was concerned about a vaccine and turn them into a warrior against critical race theory? And all of that's happening.
I mean, I want to go back and sort of see if we can trace some of this, because back in, like in 2006, maybe it was, like, I had a buddy, he was living in rural Nebraska, and we would have these conversations where he's like, he seemed to be almost like politicized, in the sense that he was like, Dick Cheney is horrible. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. And he's like, he's literally, he is literally, I've been reading David Icke's, and he's literally like a lizard person. And I'm like, wait, no, that's not it. It's not that he's a lizard person. It's all these policies he's doing. He's like, oh, you're just getting caught up in politics. And I'm like, wait, no, he's not really a lizard person. And it feels like that is sort of the same dynamic that's going on here, where on one level there can be some type of agreement, right? Like, pharmaceutical companies are bad, but there is a lack of sort of like an ideological underpinning that then, I mean, I think at one point you wrote, facts wrong, but feelings right.
Yeah, and this is true of Wolf, my own doppelganger. And, where this started to feel more serious to me was when she really made this right-wing turn and suddenly was on Tucker Carlson's show when he had one on Fox, and was going on Steve Bannon's show very regularly. And what she was talking about was this claim that the vaccine verification apps that we all downloaded onto our phones was actually a kind of a covert plot to bring, as she said, tyranny to the West, a Chinese-style social credit system, that these apps were going to be able to listen to our conversations wherever we were, know who we were meeting with. And the response from liberals online was like, oh, just crazy rantings, but also wait till they hear about cell phones. So it was a kind of a knowing sneer, right? Like, we all know that it's actually our cell phones that are tracking us in these ways. But that really struck me as something very interesting. And it explained why this was getting the kind of traction it was, because, do we, people on the left side of the spectrum have a plan for what to do about surveillance capitalism? We all know it's real. We all know that there was supposed to be something happening under the Biden administration, but very little has happened. I know they're trying, but, our data is not safe. Our cell phones really have outrageous capacity to keep track of us. And so that's the kind of feelings that they get right? So she's taking all of our collective surveillance fears that are real and justified, and very little is happening. And we are having this kind of sneering reaction to it, because we're not doing anything about it, I would argue, and pivoting it onto something that feels like you could do something about it. Like we could just get the apps off our phone, right? And that's the appeal of all of these conspiracy theories, is that they tap into very real fears and anger about real inequality and injustice. But then, like you say about the lizard people, the story becomes not this is a system that is rigged and we need to change the system and maybe we need democratic socialism. There's this group of lizard people. They meet every year at Davos. Let's get the lizard people. And that's the kind of narrative structure of QAnon, but it really is the narrative structure of every conspiracy theory. And certainly the most ancient conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, right? Like there's this cabal of Jews. And that's why, back to the 1800s, anti-Semitism was described as the socialism of fools, right? It is how you understand injustice and inequality if you don't have a structural analysis of capital. And so you're going to believe that there's a room somewhere. And then, the QAnon story of there's going to be a great storm. There's going to be a moment when Donald Trump leads the white hats to arrest all the black hats and send them to Gitmo. Like that's the story that they're telling. And, I'm sure as both of you have been, around the left for a long time and pointed out injustice and inequality for a long time, you can imagine the appeal of a story that says there's actually going to be a day of accountability, right?
Well, that sounds like it sounds like religious. It sounds like religion when you say that. I mean, to Sam's point about your friend in Nebraska, where he thinks Dick Cheney is a lizard person, it's an anti-political construction. It's a more, the facts wrong, feelings right construction is one of emotion and one that eschews political solutions and structural change for essentially demons amongst us. And then, I think some of that mirror world is the manipulation of kind of spirituality, which had been in many ways connected to the left in previous kind of political collaborations and contingency and cohorts, to an entirely different anti-political, anti-solidarity, very isolated system of complete paranoia that's been manipulated in that way.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. But the Dick Cheney example is a good one, right? In the sense that it points to the way that conspiracy culture on the right, which is absorbing parts of the left in real time, and we've all seen it, feeds off of impunity and left failures to hold people like Dick Cheney accountable, right? Like in a just world, Dick Cheney would have faced some accountability for the lies that led to the Iraq War. For the fact, I think, Sam, probably the first interview we had way back when was probably having to do with Halliburton's contracts, that Dick Cheney oversaw. And so I think that this level of impunity that we have in our culture is profoundly corrosive. And I think it unhinges people. Like, I think bearing witness to the lack of accountability over so many decades eventually pushes some people into the arms of this sort of more religious narrative that promises some almost otherworldly level of accountability.
Well, let's break down these sort of the elements of how we got, because I also distinctly remember, that guy, I don't want to harp too much on him anymore, but he was, an early Alex Jones fan. And, my idea of Alex Jones, 15, 20 years ago was, if this guy didn't exist, the CIA would invent him because he's taking people down. He's identifying a problem, right? Like the world is, we don't have much power in this world. And he's saying it's, people drinking blood at the Bilderberger group or whatever it is. And it completely, it depoliticizes. It mystifies and depoliticizes. So we have that element going on. And you mentioned the lack of accountability.
And the thing about depoliticizing, though, that is slightly, I think we should be clear on what we mean by depoliticizing. From a kind of a strict Marxist perspective, it's a depoliticization and a mystification. But from a Steve Bannon perspective, it's extremely strategic and political, and it has a political plan,
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I want to ask you about, the different sort of components that exist here. Like, for instance, when we talk about Naomi Wolf, I remember at the end of the Bush years, she was really getting into the authoritarian nature of the Bush administration. Also, with another guy who was a very frequent guest of mine, was Mark Crispin Miller, was also getting into that at that time. They have followed similar trajectories since then. And
our friends, yeah,
and our friends, because I do think that's also part of it. Is like there's support networks that take place here, but so that authoritarianism
and with someone like Mark, 9/11 trutherism is a gateway.
Yes, but that again is another thing where you have a vacuum of accountability on some level, and people needs to rush in. I mean, Mark was also like heavily involved in like the election stuff, but there was some real questions about our elections. When you have,
there's always a little bit of truth,
right.
And there are always progressive failures that are being fed off of, right? And this is where in the end the book ends up being about how the right is creating a doppelganger of the left, taking pieces of a left agenda that I recognize, but we have abandoned. And this is where, we may still think, oh yeah, we're the people who are taking on big pharma. We're the people taking on big tech. We're the people taking on these free trade deals. But are we? Like, when's the last time we really did,
Right.
And we've actually been focused on a lot of other stuff. And that deep anti-capitalist critique that I think is really central to any kind of robust left has taken a back seat. And somebody like Bannon he's a strategic guy. And, that's what he did in 2016 with specifically free trade, right? Union guys who'd voted for Democrats in 3 election cycles, who'd promised to open up those trade deals that had deindustrialized their communities, and then proceeded to, advance more of those deals. And he said, come on over here, and Trump said, I'm going to renegotiate the deals and I'm going to bring the jobs back and so on. And what I see happening on the right with not when I talk about Bannon, I'm talking about the fact that he has been part of building a global network of far right political parties. One of them just got, a majority, the largest share of votes in the Netherlands. And it's this mix and match, right? It is not the old right. It's not the neoliberal right. It's not Dick Cheney's right. It is the right that is extremely xenophobic, extremely racist, transphobic, and mixing in, a critique of globalization, a critique of the trade deals. We're going to protect the social safety net from the immigrants, right? Giorgia Meloni as well, another one of his proteges. This is what he did when he left the White House, is he went off to form this international network of far-right political parties. There's always a little bit of something there, but this, the thing about a doppelganger is that it's a way of looking in the mirror, right? I mean, if you read any doppelganger novel back to Dostoevsky, like it ends up being a confrontation with the self. And this is what, this exploration has been for me, is like, I'm not that interested in her. I'm interested in what the fact that people are why are these ideas gaining traction? How are our own actions on the left helping to feed that? What can we learn from this? How can we see ourselves more clearly? How can we do a better job to take away some of their power? And I think when you look at a figure like Sean Fain in the United Auto, like president of the United Auto Workers, and you see the kind of like real economic populism that he stands for, like we're going to stick it to the bosses in his Eat the Rich t-shirt. That's Steve Bannon's worst nightmare. Somebody actually taking on elite power, because then it exposes the artifice of this kind of charade that's going on the right. Like they're not taking on big tech. They're not taking on big pharma. They're feeding off of silences, abandonments, and pivoting over to their real agenda.
So, I mean, if we were to look at this and we have, let's say, 2 sort of distinct tracks that are parallel in terms of how we've gotten to where we are today. We have, sort of on a personal level, someone may have like a certain desire for celebrity and wanting feedback that is positive, and there may be some trauma associated. Who knows where to take them down to a certain road? I mean, I'm talking in general. I'm not even thinking about anybody in specific. But in terms of movements, we have this lack of accountability, and we have, I guess, a frustration of nothing's being happening. Maybe that's a similar thing. Let's talk about like sort of like the circumstance that's taken place really over the past 10 years, because it feels like a lot of this got accelerated after, and it's tough to disaggregate, when Sanders' campaign ended and COVID happened, because that was basically the same month, right? Like, and but it does feel like there was a lot of people who thought there was a movement happening to address these things, and then in a month it's gone, and also we're in lockdown. Absolutely. And everything got jumbled then, because how do you this push to sort of like both emancipate us from COVID also involved like you low paid workers go first, and you're sort of the chum that we're going to put out there to keep our transition going, and things got really haywire there. And there's movements on the right that are funding this.
Well, yeah, and I think that there, if you think about something like school closures, right, and the way schools became such a battleground, masking policies, vaccination policies, and schools closing down and staying closed, in some cases for a very, very long time. The truth is, the main reason I moved back to Canada was because the schools were open in British Columbia. That's why I stayed. I moved back to be near my parents, so I thought it was temporary. But when I realized I could send my kid to an open school, I was like, I think I'm staying. But that was a very big deal to me as a parent. I have a neuroatypical kid, and he needed to be in school. He couldn't do Zoom classes. That was not possible for him. And I think that there was when I say that we become reactive to what is going on in the mirror world, what I mean is that when an issue becomes their issue, so they're the ones talking about some of the problems with these policies, then we are just the ones just offering blanket support. Yeah, great. Close the schools. Yeah, get everybody. Yeah, you need to get vaccinated to go to work. And download the app. And it's not true that the apps could listen to our phone conversations, but it is true that when you insert technology, you allow it to mediate people's access to spaces, that is going to exclude people based on wealth. It's going to exclude people based on all kinds of things. It's not a society I particularly want to live in. But when that started to become a right-wing issue, because it's being funded and propped up by people on the right who understand this to be strategic, then we're just the obedience people. And that is a gift to them, because it means more and more people are going to look for anyone who's talking about issues that they care about, and they're going to be the only ones. There is a lot at work. And obviously a big piece of it is the attention economy. When you talk about the past 10 years or a figure like Alex Jones, there have always been conspiracy theorists, but I don't think never before have so many people been able to earn a living based on who can make the most outrageous claim quickly, right? So it's the collision of people looking for ways to make sense of the world, more and more shocking events, and there's going to be more of them in the era of climate change, and all of these people who are just ready, and unburdened by any need to the truth, to fealty to the truth, to just make whatever is going to get the clicks. And
didn't Trump also add to this sort of like binary nature in the way we respond? I mean, because I think it's even lost in the context of like, the school shutdowns, because the unions were basically saying, the teachers union were saying like, we don't want to go in until it's safe. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that until COVID's gone. That means until we expend the money to put things like air filters in a school, or to make sure that we have an ability to have some distancing when we eat, which of course we have no social structure in which to provide any of that stuff and to address any of that stuff. And so it was not a question of like, we don't want to go into school. It was like, we don't want to go into school if it's going to be a meat grinder.
Exactly. And so this is where it intersects with, 40 years of neoliberal economic policies that have defunded the schools, that have defunded healthcare. And so it isn't just sending your kid to class, it's sending your kid to a class with 35 other kids and one teacher and very little time outdoors and decrepit infrastructure and no, terrible air. So, but this points to what I mean by it's holding up a mirror to the left and why we can't just be reactive. Look, I think people should get vaccinated. I think people should have been wearing masks. And I think a lot of those schools did need to be closed where COVID was surging. Absolutely. But that's not the end of the demands. If you have a robust left, you are demanding smaller classrooms. You are demanding, creative responses, more outdoor education. You're demanding more nurses, more doctors, real investments in public health care. Talk about the Bernie campaign, that juxtaposition here. Many of us were, including me, campaigning with everything we had for a candidate whose centerpiece of his campaigns was universal public health care. Yeah. So it isn't just that, these, like Bernie's collapse coincides with lockdown. It's also the collapse of the idea of universal health care coincides with the pandemic. And a huge part of the reason why the U.S. was hit as hard as it was is because it has such a dysfunctional healthcare system.
I think a lot of the real, like the huge death count in New York in those first a month or two was a function of Medicaid hospitals, public hospitals being shut down by Andrew Cuomo in the years prior to it by 20 or 30%. And so we can track, the death rates because of the lack of those hospitals.
Well,
so,
I think the bottom line, just one thing I would just say, and I feel like all of my responses are coming down to the fact that we actually need a real left. And we've had a very sort of online, very sort of personal branding based left. It hasn't been a fighting left. We're starting to see some examples of a left that is back on the picket line, that is back talking about economic justice. Also, we're seeing a resurgence of an anti-war left around the huge Palestine solidarity, ceasefire protests. And, I've been part of a lot of these conversations where people are saying, yes, we are demanding a ceasefire. We're demanding that Israel abide by a ceasefire and that this not be some little temporary 4-day thing, but that this actually be the beginning of peace with justice in the region. But also a new robust anti-war movement that understands colonialism, that understands imperialism, that understands capitalism, that isn't just about this one call to stop now. I think that's the best way to confront this weird political scrambling that we've been talking about. You're not going to fight it with content moderators. You're going to fight it by giving people a real alternative of social movements with political power that stand to change things materially in many people's lives.
Well, you have a chapter on Israel and Palestine, which is quite, relevant, obviously, even though I'm sure you wrote it before. You must have written this all before October 7th, obviously. And that is that essentially Israel's politics and its far-right politics are a doppelganger of much of the nationalism that you described that Steve Bannon's kind of accolades are displaying. So can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, the term doppelganger politics comes from a British academic named Carolyn Rooney, a scholar of Middle East studies, who describes Israel's politics as a doppelganger politics in the sense that the argument for Israel as a Jewish homeland, as a Jewish state, was the idea that the way to fight anti-Semitism was not to fight for universal values around and justice, but to have a fortress nationalist project. And it sort of accepted the premise that the reason why Jews have been targeted for millennia is because Jews don't have a state of their own. And so that's what Zionism offered. And it wasn't, not all forms of Zionism were as invested in this idea of a fortress state. That was always a more right-wing version of Zionism. There were always figures like Martin Buber, Hannah Arendt, who wanted a Jewish homeland to be part of an Arab federation. But that is not the Zionism that won. And the Zionism that won was this idea that, we we Jews will have a fortress state of our own, and kind of put a gun to the head of anti-Semites and be safe that way. And I think the extreme sort of vengeance-fueled response to October 7th is a response to the fact that October the 7th showed that was not possible. It pierced the bubble of security without justice in Israel, which is what has been, since the Oslo process collapsed. You've had successive Israeli governments who have claimed that it would be possible to have a kind secure life in Israel without any peace process whatsoever. And there would just be this ongoing grind and more fortressing, right? Like the wall is a relatively new development, post 9/11. And when that was breached on such a huge and horrific scale on October 7th, it wasn't, the whole project came into crisis. And this extreme response, which is it is, in my view, it is not about eradicating Hamas. It is about reestablishing this claim that it is possible to have this bubble of security without justice, without any kind of response to Palestinian rights. And it's not going to work. It's going to breed more violence. And that's why there's been, I think, such strong Jewish leadership in response, and saying, this is madness.
It's like a white-knuckled attempt to mow the lawn again, as it were, and it's just not. I don't, in the words of famed word, I think it was an Israeli general who said that was basically the way that they had decided to deal with Palestinians, but. I just want to go back just a little bit, just for a moment, in terms of talking about these power dynamics and the where we can go in terms of we see the left sort of reasserting power, or attempting to, through labor, essentially, in this country, and providing these answers. What? How much of how much of this is going to be, how much do we need to be in a bailing water phase before we are, sort of building a ship? I mean, and can those be done simultaneously?
When you say bailing water, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, we're, in the short term, we're at sort of a precipice, it seems like, on some level, at least within this country's politics. I mean, there's no indication that the right is going in any other direction. I think Trump is an accelerant, both for the dynamic you're talking about and for the right wing moving forward, because he has he has no politics outside of what's in his best interest. And so he becomes almost sort of the perfect vehicle, even beyond an ideologue, who can get himself into trouble. Like a Ron DeSantis can, who I think is in many respects, a true believer. His obsession with woke got him. He couldn't move away from that quick enough. But Trump has this sort of fluidity where it's like, I'm going to pick up these things that resonate, and that's where Bannon, I think he probably gets a lot of that from Bannon, is these are nascent sort of, or these are strands of sort of left leaning thought that I can adopt here, protect Social Security and Medicare, for instance, that I think make Trump particularly dangerous relative to sort of recapturing and rebuilding on the left.
Yeah, I mean, I think he does believe in some things. I think white supremacy has been a through line in his life.
Sure.
And it's truly an animating belief system. And you see it in the way he talks about himself. He's got a kind of obsession with genes. I think his xenophobia, his I think it's a true hatred of migrants who are not white, that, we need to. He's not that fluid. I think that is something that he that animates his project. But I agree with you that, I hear things from people like, well, he really doesn't like war, like, and maybe he'd be, and there's a vagueness there that I think is very politically useful for him, where people will claim that, well, he wouldn't have done what Biden is doing in terms of offering this kind of blanket support for Israel. I think that is not true. I think that's another one of Trump's true beliefs. And I think a lot of what we have been seeing in the past horrific months in Israel is the legacy of Jared Kushner, is the legacy of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, of this, these so-called Abraham Accords, which Biden continued.
Yep.
But, when I talk about security without peace, without justice, that all those accords with the Emirates, with neighboring Arab nations, that was all about, not like one of the reasons why people make peace with is an economic dividend, right? Like it becomes too expensive to make war, and or to continue a grinding occupation. And what those accords were about was a normalization process, normalizing this grinding apartheid system. And a lot of what I have read post October the 7th has said that this has been was a major contributing factor of what Hamas was trying to do, of saying, like, you're not going to have normal, you're not going to sign a deal with Saudi Arabia. So this is the world that Trump built with help from his son-in-law, and I think it is one of his belief systems. And I think we've done a bad job of pointing that out. And part of the reason why we've done a bad job is because we're all terrified of what's going to happen in this election because of Joe Biden's horrific blank check to Israel, which they're trying to post facto after the deaths of thousands of kids, say, oh, we didn't really mean that. We want to put some guardrails up. We've got a really, really big problem, Sam. We have a huge problem.
Well, the irony is that Biden the other day said, I think Hamas did this because we were close to peace. And I was like, well, wait a second. How is it that you're going to be close to peace when you're not including the Palestinian people in any part of that conversation? Like, of course, that is an issue. And I share your concern in terms of like it's a dilemma in terms of like I can't imagine a Democratic president being worse in this instance. Like, in terms of the complete blank check that was given to Israel up to this point. And just even the delusion
it's a true bipartisan project. It's a true bipartisan project. But the fact is, Biden has overseen an unprecedented orgy of death. Yep. And that is going to stick to him. It's going to stick to the Democrats. And, we can blame try to blame the right for this, but that's just not going to work. It's not going to work. So I don't know how they right this ship. Personally, I think that Biden should not be the candidate. I think they're not going to be able to run away from this. And it's absolutely disastrous, but it's disastrous not because of conspiracy theorists, and not because of Trump, and not because of Steve Bannon. It is disastrous because of what they've done.
I'm not quite clear on what the calculation is, although, I was just citing before you came on Peter Beinart's piece
He's a true believer.
In 2020. Yeah. That essentially Biden is just and Emma made the point there was also in the Senate, he got a lot of money in that, but from support, but that's again, a chicken and an egg. Maybe they gave him money because that was his sort of belief system. And it's an anachronistic one in my mind. I mean, this is, maybe he watched Exodus with Paul Newman, and that was we're still living in that world.
He said it was his meeting with Golda Meir in the 1970s. I mean, when we talk about a gerontocracy, like, I'm less concerned about his age as it comes to being the head of state. I'm more concerned about the age of his positions and what that indicates about policy towards Palestine.
I think that's exactly right, Emma. And I think, I think there are people of that generation who have a understanding of the lessons of the Holocaust and the pledge that we all grew up with of never again, being never again to anyone, and understanding that genocide is not that does not just mean Holocaust against Jews. We have a genocide convention that defines it as any deliberate attempt to eliminate in whole or in part an identifiable group or people. And we have Israeli politicians saying we're going to turn them into a parking lot. We're going to wipe them out. Calling them animals. That ticks the boxes under international law. And the reason we have international law is because of the Holocaust, but it's not to say that that is the only example of genocide. And now we're having people saying to say that this is genocidal violence is to deny the Holocaust, is to engage in hate speech. I mean, I teach on a university campus. We're experiencing outrageous censorship that violates the whole intent of the international humanitarian legal architecture that grew out of the Second World War and universalized it, right? And this is why I say, this was the Second World War was really a kind of a fork in the road where there were two kind of visions of never again. One of them was this, okay, let's understand what the patterns are that led to this, this crime against humanity, and let's try to draft laws that prevent it from happening ever again to anyone. And then you have this other notion that was not understood as being incompatible, but was, let's also have a fortress state for the Jews, an ethno state. And it turns out you actually have to choose one or the other, and you have to apply it across the board. And you can't have a state that privileges one ethnicity because eventually that state is going to end up in conflict with that whole international legal architecture that universalized, that created laws against apartheid and segregation and collective punishment and eliminating a people in whole or in part. So I agree with you, Emma, that it is about it is about age in the sense that I think part of what we're seeing is this is regret about the Second World War and the fact that though the U.S. was part of the Allies that beat the Nazis, it turned away boats as did every single country that could have accepted Jews, and they're stuck in this kind of historical loop where they're constantly trying to get a do-over for the Holocaust, even if it means participating in another genocide. I believe it is an attempted genocide. When you have politicians saying, we are going to wipe them out, we want to push them into the Sinai, you should take them. I mean, when you have the Wall Street Journal publishing sitting Israeli politicians saying, you take the Palestinians, that is ethnic cleansing, that is genocide. When the people who are bombing them say that, like this is why you have hundreds of international legal experts saying it fits the definition. So in the name of never again, they're againing. That is what is happening. And yeah, I agree. That's part of the problem of a gerontocracy because they're so stuck in that historical loop. Not all of them, but a lot of them, because this is the formative
even Bernie Sanders.
But the idea of having to quote John Kerry, you can have a Jewish state or you can have a democracy. And that was 8 years ago. I think he said that.
I forgot that.
Yes. I mean, shocking to think that John Kerry, but he had a couple of moments in his day. But so in dealing with this sort of within the sort of like, I guess, the personal realm, right? Like, I mean, if we know that from a movement level, it is about organizing and largely through our labor in some instances to sort of like affect change and begin to sort of address these the vacuum of answers in whether they're material answers or sometimes sort of explanations, I think, which conspiracy and sort of an anti-authoritarianism that is unhinged and distinct from any type of ideological bearing, I guess. Like, what do we do on an individual level?
Well, it's interesting around the conspiracy, because one of the things I get into in the book is the way anti-Semitism has always been used to damage left-wing coalitions. And back to the first failed Russian Revolution in the early 1900s, before the successful one, there was an attempt to overthrow the Tsar, and the Jewish Labor Bund was absolutely central as part of this, which was a left-wing labor coalition of Jews that also had militias. And after that revolution failed, the Tsar's response was twofold: one, to offer some minor, like a weak parliamentary democracy, not real democracy, and the other was to unleash the hounds of anti-Semitism onto this coalition that had almost had a successful coalition, and to distribute the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and to pit the Christian working class against the Jewish working class. And this led to some of the bloodiest pogroms in history. Now, I think what we're seeing, which is simply to say that conspiracy, like the idea that there is a group that there's a room somewhere where the elders are plotting and are figuring it all out, has always been a political project. It is an elite protecting political project. It's not apolitical. It serves elite power very, very well because it distracts people and pits working classes against one another.
It's depoliticizing on some level because it becomes about mystification, right? I mean, if it's not a political structure that we're dealing with, if it's just a bunch of folks in a room who.
Well, it protects the existing political structure, right? Okay. Right? And it gives you a target. It's the oldest story in the book. What is happening now is that anti-Semitism and the fight against anti-Semitism, and we must fight anti-Semitism, is also being used to break apart left political coalitions,
right?
And all kinds of inter-ethnic divisions are being sown. Bannon is really good at this. I mean, he calls what he's building now inclusive nationalism, because basically what he's doing is peeling away, in the same way that he peeled away some white working class guys who had voted Democrat and brought them over to Trump. Now he's trying to do it with Latino and Black men who are upset that they think their teachers are turning their kids trans, and he's like, come on over, we can work with this, right? But this is what they're doing. I mean, maybe we're disagreeing over terms. I do see it as a very political project, but what it is doing is steering away from a critique of structures, a socialist project that would seek to build different structures. So what do? We stick together. We work through it. We have zero tolerance for Islamophobia, racism, transphobia, anti-Semitism. I mean, this is why. I think it is very, very important that we have a moral left that stands strong against the targeting of civilians and for international law, regardless of the context. Because how are we supposed to say that Israel needs to abide by international law if we're saying that Hamas doesn't need to abide by international law? But we need to be guided by values. We need to be guided by morals. We need to have a absolutely firm line on anti-Semitism and not give into any of these, temptations to believe that there's some room somewhere. And we need to build the alternative, which is that a left that is focused on real systems of power and proposing alternatives, which brings us back to why it was such horrifically bad timing that a political project that was bringing people out of their, not just their individual identity groups, but also the individual self that is the promise of capitalism, right? Like, you're going to improve yourself, you're going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Bernie's campaign, which brought people together, was not me, us, right? And it wasn't like, that you don't matter, but that there is an us, that you don't need to confront these systems on your own, that you can be part of a movement that is taking on medical debt, that's depersonalizing it, that's taking on student debt, that's fighting for real systemic responses and solutions like universal public health care, and a $15 minimum wage. These are all examples of what we need to be doing. I think what we learned from the Bernie campaign is that a campaign is not a political campaign, an electoral campaign, is not a sturdy enough structure to hold the left, right? And so when Bernie loses, and it wasn't fair, and there was the whole party ganged up on him, as was totally predictable. But when that happened, then we were just kind of dumped in a sea of me, like all of us who had been part of this not me, us. It was suddenly me, 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 me. And that's when you saw everybody turning on each other. And then, yes, it coincided with lockdown. And so we weren't able to gather.
It coincided with the most isolated you could probably be under any context, right? Like everybody go home
let's not
and be with
forget
yourself.
Black Lives Matter and that spring,
Right.
and the fact that people came into the streets despite the lockdowns. And acted with incredible solidarity and in multiracial coalition, Black led. That was a really, really important rupture, right? And I think that I think some of those coalitions fell apart in part because they were trying to kind of maintain themselves over Zoom and the sort of interstitial moments when people in movements are able to be together and maybe cut each other some slack weren't there. I mean, that's part of the story, but it's not the whole story by any means.
Maybe a path forward, I guess, just to bring it back to what you were saying about the hopefully the anti-war movement maintaining itself and being unceasing is a solidarity movement that opposes nationalism in all of its forms, whether it's ethnic or religious nationalism, which I think dovetails nicely with the racial protest that for equality that you describe. Because we've said this on the show, when it comes to Zionism, it's not about the Jewish part of Jewish nationalism. It's the nationalism that's the problem. It's not the Christian part of Christian nationalism that's the problem. It's the nationalism part. And you can apply that to all of the other contexts that you describe of these resurgent kind of nationalist far-right movements internationally.
Yeah.
That could be, I think, maybe a big umbrella term to combat many of the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think that, this is why, when I eavesdrop on various conversations that are happening on the, more Zionist, in more Zionist parts of my family, and, what are the stories that are being told to rationalize these war crimes? It's fear. It's fear that if the boot is lifted off of Palestinians' necks, even for a moment, then they will do to Jews what Jews did to them in the Nakba and have just been doing to them, which is ethnic cleansing. And when you have Hamas leaders that go on, Lebanese television and say, yeah, that's the plan, it doesn't help because those clips get played over and over and over again in Israel, but that, what you're speaking to, Emma, is the fact that there needs to be a principles-based, like a values-based, principled-based left that is standing up to nationalism in all of its forms. And so that means that it doesn't get to be Hamas's turn to ethnically cleanse the Jews. Like that's not going to be the vision of justice. And we will stand up to that in the same way. And I think that people aren't hearing that enough. I don't think people are hearing that. I think Jews aren't hearing that enough. I think Israelis aren't hearing that enough from the left, of saying, that's not the vision of the future that we're going to allow to happen. And the fears are not without any basis. I think one of the lessons of, I was reading Vincent Bevan's book, Until We Burn, about he calls it the decade of the mass protests, and he's talking about the Arab Spring, and he's talking about all of these huge mass mobilizations that have come from the left, but have often failed. And often what has happened is that there's been a political vacuum that gets opened up through mass movement. And if you aren't ready with what your vision is to fill that, and if you don't have a political project, then somebody else is going to fill it for you, right? And what happened in Egypt was that you had like a big, largely secular youth movement in Tahrir Square that didn't have a political program, that wasn't ready to take power, and the Muslim Brotherhood entered into that vacuum, and then was violently overthrown. And now you have Sisi, who's worse than Mubarak. But the lesson of that tragedy, and it's ongoing because so many incredible activists remain behind bars in Egypt, is when we resist, we can't just be saying no. We also have to have a plan for the yes, and we have to have these legible values and principles of what we stand for, because it isn't without basis to have a fear that Hamas wants to ethnically cleanse, especially when you have leaders who go on television saying that that's what they want. That doesn't mean that that is what will happen, but it does mean that we have to be honest about the sort of landscapes that we're in.
Is that when you talk about creating uncomfortable coalitions in the book? What specifically are we talking about in that regard?
I mean, I think any good coalition is uncomfortable. If it's comfortable, it means it's probably not wide enough. I think partly what I'm talking about, Sam, is that I think that there's some sort of very reactionary anti-identity politics discourse on the left, where it's like this idea of like we all have to put our identities aside and come together in this universalist mush kind of, and I think honestly that's partly why Bernie couldn't go all the way. I don't think Bernie could totally understood that there wasn't going to that the us had to have a lot of different positionalities in it, and that we can come together, but we're not going to check our pasts at the door, our different ways in which we enter coalition, and that recognizing that we come with these past traumas, intergenerational traumas. I think these anti-war coalitions that are coming together are uncomfortable, and really uncomfortable conversations are happening along the lines that we're talking about right now. Coming back to Israel-Palestine, what I mean about being clear about values and building on what you were saying, Emma, about being clear that it's the nationalism that is the problem. One of the things I do at the end of the book is look at the ways in which the Nazi project was a kind of doppelganger of colonialism, and Hitler was very clear about this. He talked, he was fascinated with the Western frontier in the U.S. and in Canada, and the German idea of Lebensraum, of elbow room, of needing more space, that was the Eastern frontier, and he would draw direct parallels between the Slavs as his Indians, right? And he's like, we're gonna get rid of them in the same way that the Americans did and the Canadians did, and do we ever think of them? When we have bread, I think he said when we have bread with wheat from Canada, do we ever think of the Indians? He was very clear about what he was learning, also from U.S. Race law, from eugenics in the U.S. So it wasn't a doppelganger in the sense of like, obviously he did things that had never been done before. It was a Fordist genocide. Nobody had killed as quickly and on a scale like that before. But he learned a lot. And he talked about how the British came up with the idea of concentration camps and so on. And there was a lot of denial, certainly in the way I was taught the Holocaust in my Jewish education, in my Jewish day school. We never learned any of these connections, and there were a lot of anti-colonial scholars, Aimé Césaire, who talked about the Holocaust as colonialism turned inward. W.E.B. Du Bois saying, in the 1950s, there's nothing that Hitler did that had not been done to, the quote unquote darker nations around the world. But this is not what we learn in schools, right? We learn this very, very exceptional story. Why does that matter? It matters because we did not see the connections between race law in the U.S., the Indian reservation system, residential schools. Because we didn't look at these connections, then it somehow seemed plausible that as a form of twisted reparations for the Holocaust, Jews get to be colonizers in Palestine, get past the mantle of whiteness as literally reparations. Like when Germany gave reparations to the state of Israel, they were explicit that this was reparations for their sins. And they gave a huge amount of money in the form of infrastructure support for their early state. So this is it's only possible to imagine this as reparations if you are not seeing the connections and what Hitler learned from colonialism. And so, and this is why it's sort of extraordinary that we're not allowed to talk about Israel's settler colonialism, that this is somehow anti-Semitic. And it's like a war on history. It's a war on memory. It's a war on understanding. We can't understand any of this, including the Holocaust, without understanding settler colonialism. Because this is one long chapter that's just been moving locations.
Well, a lot to think about. Naomi Klein, the book is Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's always
Thank
great
you
to catch
both,
up.
Sam and Emma.
Thanks so much.
I appreciate it. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, folks. We will now head into the fun half of our program. Wherein we will have some fun post Thanksgiving.
We will. I was thinking about what I was grateful for, and I am grateful that I have a platform and I get to interview cool people like Naomi Klein.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had told me that when I was like 18 or something, I wouldn't have believed you, because I loved her work so much. So it's very cool to talk to her.
Yep.
Really appreciate it.
Her work with no labels.
I overlooked that. You got to make uncomfortable coalitions. It's no logo. That was such a big, I can't remember when that came out. I feel like it was in the late 90s, and there was Adbusters, and there was a whole sort of
WTO stuff.
WTO stuff in 99 in Seattle. And, oh, jeez. I'm going to my 40th high school reunion in January. I'm terrified. Oh, God. But also, the shock doctrine was obviously a really
Seminal
important book to
work,
read in the wake of the invasion and occupation. Well, not the wake of the occupation, but the wake of the invasion in Iraq. Definitely worth reading. But this is also, this dynamic of these doppelgangers. I mean, we've seen a lot of people that there have been others who have
the independent presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yes.
is a great example.
Yes. I mean, there's a certain amount of untetheredness by ideology, and Naomi Wolf was too. I mean, she was, talking, she was very vehemently into anti-authoritarianism in the late stages of the Bush administration, but there was no critique of how we got there other than it being a collection of just individuals.
Yeah.
And there was no structural critique of what promoted this, and that's sort of the problem. But moving into the fun half. Oh, I should also just say a couple of things. First off, we got merch. And if you're a member, you should have received an email that gives you a discount code. Check out the new merch stuff we have. And we're best of season. So we're not going to run, obviously, Naomi Klein's interview on our best of in a month. But maybe we will next year in a best of. But think back to the interviews this year that you thought were particularly important or best of. Send us an email, and in the subject line, write best of.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can filter it out and find those. You can send the email to majorityreporters@gmail.com.
I got to say, I think my first submission is the Elon Poppy interview that we did.
Technically, because it's in November, but we'll probably
pre-Thanksgiving. Pre-Thanksgiving.
Well, I mean, generally we usually don't do it.
But was it November?
Wasn't it November?
Or was it
early
October
November?
when we spoke to Elon Poppy?
It was October? Okay, then it makes it through.
Skin of my teeth.
But if you have other suggestions, by all means, send us those emails. We're probably going to do 5 or 6 best ofs around the Christmas time. Let's see. International Socialists. Sam, why not have one guest a month where folks can IM or email questions? Down with presenter questioning supremacy. I don't know. We're not Larry King here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But-
I mean, I've watched a lot of stuff like that, and I don't want to disparage comments, but I feel like that's sort of
Well, there's
Emma
a
and
lot of
Sam's
work.
job.
I mean, look, and here's the thing. If we open that up, we will get 300 questions per, we'll get 300 questions in an hour easily. And then we need a whole process of going through them. It's
Do you
just
look at IMs while you're doing the interviews ever?
sometimes one will hit the corner out of my eye.
Right.
Yeah.
But as a rule, no.
Maybe we'll make more of an effort to look at the IMs. How about that?
I'm
Okay,
not
no.
going to promise that either.
Yeah.
You know what? I wouldn't want to get distracted from that.
No, understood. Yeah, I mean, I would say the average cable show has probably 10 or 12 producers on it. We're 4 people doing this part in the room, so it's just a little difficult. But
What's that?
Average
That's an
cable
argument
show.
for taking crowdsourcing.
All right, whatever. Never mind. I was just saying that it's a lot to ask because we're not a big operation.
All right, and let's see what else. Oh, you're the reason why this show can exist. If you listen to the show weekly basis, I mean, you're supporting shows that are giving you 1 or 2 shows a week.
Pathetic.
So if you watch the show once or twice a week, why not? If you watch it 5 days a week, obviously, to become a member, go to jointhemajority.report.com. When you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, you get the fun half. And you also get to IM the show, and occasionally we send you a 10% discount on our merch. I think that ends up we end up eliminating all of I don't think we have more than a 10% markup on any of our merch at all.
We losing money on this?
It's not inconceivable. It wouldn't be the first time, but all of our merch is union made in the United States of America. Shop.majorityreportradio.com. Also, just a reminder, if you can't afford to become a member, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com and put, member hardship or something like that. And we will hook you up. We don't lock anybody out for finances. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee featuring the Majority Report blend. You can get that at Just Coffee. Makes a great gift. Put it in your Majority Report merch.
Stocking stuffer, too.
Stocking stuffer. Oh, yeah, it's huge. Oh, yeah, maybe that's a...
I always forget about stocking stuffers, so I'm trying to...
I've been searching. Oh, wait, no, I can't do that.
What?
Never mind. I'll tell you later.
Okay.
I was thinking about that as a gift, but for somebody, and then I realized they're not coffee drinkers. Emma.
Yes. I mean, ESPN is going to be a great show today because honestly, that was one of the best NFL weeks that I've lived through. Really, really fun. Eagles, Jaguars, epic wins. Frank Reich has been fired by the hot-headed billionaire owner, who I'm going to tee off of, David Tepper in Carolina. Sean McDermott, Brandon Staley next ? And also, I hate Derek Carr, and I have a rant about it at youtube.com/ESPN show.
How much
at 4
money
p.m.
you win?
today. I doubled my money this weekend, so that's why it was a good look. It was a rough start on Thanksgiving because all of the underdogs really did not cover the spread. But I clawed back. Thought the Bills would keep it close. I knew Josh Allen would pass for
a good weekend.
over 1.5 touchdowns. Anyway, go on.
Left Reckoning, speaking of 1 to 2 shows a week, you can get that. Also, we have merch ourselves, including a new edition, which is the Fence Carter sweatshirt, if you want to go click on that. $45, you can get this product, which is made especially for you as a sturdy and warm sweatshirt bound to keep you warm in the colder months. A pre-shrunk classic fit sweater that's made with airjet spun yarn for a soft feel. So you know it's really good. So check that out, folks. That is at Left Reckoning store. leftreckoning.com. You can find our store. Check that out.
Yeah. I really want that hat, which I feel like you said you have.
I have
in your
actually.
apartment.
I'll bring it.
It's been
I have
2 years.
It's been a year.
Oh,
I have
year.
Bradley and Emma's hats. I get up in the morning. I'm like, should I carry those hats? Not today.
Okay, not today.
Rough.
Soon.
Really rough.
And you know they're really heavy. They've got to
Exactly, it's
pay.
a burden.
It's like 2 pounds put together. Wow.
646-257-3920 is the number. We'll head into the fun half. 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, and I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now, and I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now, but I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Naomi Klein.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's.
Stop talking
Oh,
for a
wow.
second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is this?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello? Is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go start life.
Libertarians.
They're so stupid, though.
Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
Positively quivering.
I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-35 501 1/2 3/8
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
654 $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You can call it satire. Sam goes to satire.
On top of it all,
Yeah.
my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the week being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look.